We've seen how we can standardize numbers and control those numbers that have been brought in from a data import, but now we need to tackle dates and time, which really, for want of a single word to describe it, can only be the word nightmare. Before we look at the tools that we have to manipulate dates, we just need to understand how Excel deals with dates. Now, effectively, in Excel's world, dates are just numbers, and you can get behind the date and find the serial number that refers to that date or time very easily by simply stripping the format away. So if we take this dates data file, you can see in cell 1 we have 11-1900, and if I simply choose that cell and choose general, it strips away all the date formatting, and I'm left with the serial number of 1. The reason I have 11-1900 in that cell A1 and it's showing serial number 1 is because that is the first day in Excel's world on Windows. What you'll find on a Mac is that Excel's first date is actually January the 2nd, 1904. Both versions of Excel do deal slightly differently with dates, as in what's the starting point, and the starting point is a slightly different place. Now, this isn't an issue until you start trying to link between workbooks that have been created with different date start point systems. Now, you can change your workbook between the two systems. So at the moment we're in a Windows situation and the default is 1900. That's why when I remove the formatting from there, I get 1. If I remove the formatting from here, you see I get 1463. So if I put the formatting back on both those cells and then go into File, Options, Advanced, scroll right down the advanced options until I get to Calculating, and here's the option to move from one date system to another. It's not advisable on a workbook that already has an amass of data within it, but for our purposes it's good to demonstrate. So we put a tick in, OK. Now what you will notice is these two dates have changed. So I had dates in those two cells. Those dates then had serial numbers behind them. Now that I've changed the date system, those dates have actually changed. The serial numbers remain the same, but the dates have changed that get displayed. So you can see the potential here for problems when moving one workbook to another system and then changing its date system. So be a little bit careful, that's the main thing, particularly if you try to link to another workbook that has a different date system within it. As far as Excel is concerned, behind those two cells, there are two raw numbers. That is raw number 1, and the other one is 1463. Now, because we've changed date systems, the actual date changes to the 1904 date system, where January the 2nd, 1904 is date 1, and our 1463 happens to be January the 3rd, 1908. So let's go back and change it back round, so advanced, all the way down to Calculating, and remove that 1904 tick. OK, and my dates revert back to where they were. Now, it's not such a headache as it would quite seem. As long as you don't change the year system when you inherit a workbook or link to a workbook, then everything will be fine. The dates will be the same. If, however, you do need to change the date system because you want to work with an existing workbook, then you will need to make sure you either subtract 1462 from all your dates or add 1462 to all your dates to get them to be the same date as they were in the other system. What a nightmare. The other thing to be aware of when dealing with dates is the 2-digit year assumption. So if we come down to this little cell here, and I type a date in, what about 1225? And then I want to put a year in, but I don't put the century value. Let's put 16, return. Excel assumes 2016. If, however, we move forward in time, and I put 1225-30 and return, Excel then assumes 1930 rather than 2030. The decision it makes is actually driven by the operating system, not by Excel, and currently the choice is at that 30 mark, which is why I went for 30. So at 30 up to 99, the assumption is 1900. From 00 to 29, the assumption is 2000. Now, obviously, if you're not too aware of the assumption being made, then the safest option is always to type 4-digit years. So that's a good habit to get into. Or you can go into the Windows regional settings and change that dividing mark. So it doesn't have to be 30. You could perhaps move it forward to 40, perhaps move it forward to 50. You're completely in control. Obviously, when you're in Excel and working away, you need to know it's making the right decision. To make sure it's making the right decision, always type a 4-digit year. So then I could actually get in to type 1225 2030, and it will take the 2030. It's not a problem. It's just when I put 30 in, the assumption was 19. A little minor headache to be aware of. Now, when dealing with time, as we have two time options here, time is just a proportion of a day. So in decimal terms, 12 hours there is half a day, so that would be 0.5. 1800 hours is 3/4 of a day, so that would be 0.75. We can prove that that's the case by again removing the formatting by going to General, and you see a 0.5 and 0.75. I then put the formatting back on to give me my time back. It then goes haywire because it wasn't a default format, so let's do undo and undo as the quickest option of returning my date values. Now we can actually convert decimal values to actual date values rather than use the formatting, because formatting is just formatting. If I tried to copy and paste this elsewhere, it might not work. So if I turn that back into decimal values and I physically want to see time rather than change the formatting, then I can use the text function, which we have used previously, if you do recall. So it's text of that cell there, comma, and then in speech marks, how do I want to see the 0.5? Well, I want to see it in hours and minutes, close brackets, return, and I get my 12:00. I want to do the same to 0.75. Well, it's in the same relative position, so I can just copy and paste the function, and I get my 1800s. So the text function there, extremely useful for formatting the decimal value to display the time value. Now, vice versa, it's a little more tricky. If I want, for example, to change 11 hours, 30 minutes into 11.5 hours, then I need to do a little bit of cleverness here. Equals, open brackets, cell with the date in, take away integer value of the cell with the date in, close round brackets for my integer function, close round brackets for BODMAS, so it does this takeaway first before times in by 24, which is obviously the number of hours in a day, and then I get 11.5. So the same will happen with 745. Let's replicate that formula. It becomes 7.75 in decimal terms. So we can do the vice versa here. We can format decimals into time portions, and we can format time portions into decimal portions. Quite useful if you're wanting to manipulate the data that you're importing. And then the last clever bit here I'd like to explore when it comes to data you've imported. If we go to the Import tab, sometimes dates will come in from external systems like this. There's no divider between the month, the day, and the year. So it's not immediately obvious to Excel what to do with the date, the month, and the year. We could do some clever string manipulation and say, okay, let's take the first two characters, and let's take the third and the fourth character, and let's take the fifth and the sixth character. They're my date parts, so my month, my day, and my year. Let's stick them together and convert them into a date. Now that's all possible, and we could do that, or we can do the quick method, which is to highlight the values, go to data. You will like this. Text to columns. We're going with delimited, although there's no delimiter because the numbers are just next to each other. Next, make sure there's no delimiters chosen. Next, and here's the clever bit, the column data format. If I choose date, make sure I choose it in the right format. So I've got MDY there, which is month, day, year. That's good. It could be any of these. You need to watch how the date is and determine how it's coming in. Now it's coming in as month, day, year. That's the only change I make. So there's nothing in the delimited option. I make the change here to date, MDY, and then I finish. And hey presto, I might need to widen because of the hashes. Those numbers have all been converted into date values that I can now manipulate in Excel. So that's a clever little way of importing what effectively looks like a set of raw numbers and not having to do some text string manipulation to then build my date up from 3 little bits into a single date. I've simply used the import text to columns option to convert what it sees before it into month, day, year, and then it can display that formatted as month, day, year. So this has been a few tools for helping to deal with date and time on imported data.